So hello and welcome guys. Today's a video that I just have to get out. This is something I talk about here and there, but I never really get to break this down. This may not be the most important subject for a lot of horror fans, but this is something I'm very passionate about, and I'm gonna try to solve this mystery once and for all. You might have heard this notion that there was some sort of issue with the music with Return of the Living Dead's Part 2. A lot of people remember this instance where this DVD came out and the score was different from the VHS. So let me take you down my story and what I think the reality of this entire situation is, and hopefully I can put an end to this mystery once and for all. This is the story of one of horror's biggest mysterious DVD releases. Now, getting into horror had its fables in and of itself. People would talk to me about horror movies that had certain scenes or certain silly things that happened in these movies that made them legendary. But getting into physical media horror was also something that I was going to learn had just as many fables. So we go back to the year 2010, early 2010, mind you. I was watching movies and I had just seen The Return of the Living Dead. Now, the release in question that I saw was definitely this release, the original Return of the Living Dead DVD release, and this movie changed my life. I think I was just going back to the store to possibly try and find another version of the movie. I think I saw that there was some sort of collector's edition DVD, and I wanted to have that. But what I found instead took me by surprise. I had no idea this existed. The movie in question was in fact Return of the Living Dead Part 2. Now, this was the release that I purchased at FYE a few weeks after seeing Part 1. I took this home really in love with the imagery that I saw on here. What I call is the legendary tornado zombie, an image that is burned into my mind and screams 80s horror more than anything I've ever seen. Peruse the front and back looking at it, wondering what I'm going to be in for. I noticed some familiar names like Kenny Myers, who did work on Part 1, Tom Matthews, James Karen. I was super excited. This is a sequel. Getting home and watching Return of the Living Dead Part 2 was definitely an interesting experience. I had never really seen anything like this before. I didn't judge it because I was really enamored with the subject matter, but it was really bizarre to watch a sequel with characters from Part 1 that were basically living in some sort of side world, in essence some sort of a weird remake. But not really a remake. It's almost just like a different iteration of the first movie. It really took me back, but I was so in love with the aesthetic of the film that I completely forgave it. Just seeing James Karen in a horror movie again like this was enough for me to be like, this is incredible. I finished watching Return of the Living Dead Part 2 and fell in love with the sights and sounds of the movie. Now, it's obviously very debatable whether you think Return of the Living Dead 2 is a good horror comedy, but in my opinion, I think Part 2 is a great horror comedy, as long as you like a little bit more of the lighter side of things. But lo and behold, a few months later, I was watching some people do DVD video updates and things like that, and I wish I could remember the exact person. I unfortunately can't. But what I do remember is somebody holding up their copy of this movie, and it looked like some sort of a bootleg version of it. And they basically said, yeah, I had to get this because of the different music that was put into this one. Now, I would hear this from different people saying that they thought it was some sort of lawsuit as to why the music was different on the DVD release of Return of the Living Dead Part 2. My interest was piqued. I had to hear what the actual soundtrack was on the old VHS release. So naturally, me being a big Laserdisc fan, I went out and I picked up Return of the Living Dead on Laserdisc, which is the equivalent of having it on VHS at the time. So I put this movie in, watched what is really considered the true authentic version of this film at the time, but to me, this was the alternate, considering I was watching that DVD for some time, and I heard the music in this movie and realized that the score for this really turned that movie into more of this genuine, bubbly, fun comedy. Horror comedy, but a fun comedy. I was aghast by how different the music was and how much it definitely shaped and changed the movie. Time would go on, and I would bring this DVD up every now and again, and people would say the same thing. Yeah, it's a shame about the lawsuit with the music. So let me stop right here and ask you, the audience, a question. When somebody would say a lawsuit with music, there's a few things that could run through your head. Like in Return of the Living Dead Part 1, where they had an instance where some of the bands like Young Fast Iranians had to get pulled from the soundtrack on different home video releases, and they were replaced with another band. That makes a lot of sense. Sometimes when they use these record labels to put music on, they could have certain deals for certain kinds of things, maybe theatrical or a home video, or maybe specific to a home video release. It could be a mess. But when a music is written by a composer that is hired to make music for a film, for that to be able to not be on the DVD release or the home video release, I never have really heard of anything like that before. So Return of the Living Dead 2 worked with Island Records, and this is the soundtrack for the movie. It actually has the theme that was written by J. Peter Robinson, who did the soundtrack that we now are accustomed to on the Scream Factory Blu-ray and the original release. Now, all the bands that were on Island Records worked with Lorimar Pictures to have that soundtrack put on there. So the bands like Julian Cope and Anthrax and Leatherwolf are in both versions of the film, albeit they're in different spots. So before I get to the conclusion of this whole thing of what I think really happened, we have to go into the nitty-gritty. When Scream Factory announced their Blu-ray release, a lot of fans were extremely excited because they were able to get that original score that really just works better for the film. I like the DVD release, but more on that in a moment. I thought I was going to get my answers finally. They had the composer do an interview on here, and they also had the great Ken Wiederhorn, who I think is a fantastic director, actually do an interview for this release as well. If you don't have this release from Scream Factory, it is a perfect Blu-ray release. Tons and tons of interviews, tons of special features. So finally, I'm watching the Ken Wiederhorn interview, and I am waiting with bated breath for him to discuss the soundtrack issue with the film. And here's what Ken said. He said that when he was making the movie, somebody, unbeknownst to him, was hired to be able to do music for the film that he heard and didn't like. So he called the head of Lorimar Entertainment to basically complain to the head honcho about how the music just doesn't work with this film. So what he did was he took that score and conceivably put it into the movie and sent it over to the head of Lorimar to hear so that he could realize, okay, I see what you mean, this music doesn't really work. So then Ken was able to hire a different composer to come in and make the score we know and love for Return of the Living Dead Part 2. Now, the interesting thing is Ken Wiederhorn does not name the person who did this first score that was put into the movie and was sent to Lorimar for them to hear. I have searched high and low on the internet and have not found that information yet. So I had an idea. What I wanted to do was this. I pulled up both versions of the film and went to the credit sequences. I looked for where the composer's name would have come up for music composed by, and it's not there. However, J. Peter Robinson's name comes up for music composed by in the beginning, but there's no name at the end of the credits. So a few differences in here is this. Of course, the band songs are in different spots in the movie. For instance, on the DVD release, Flesh to Flesh plays at the very end, and on the other release, the Monster Mash theme plays at the end. I actually prefer the Flesh to Flesh theme playing at the end of the DVD release. But one of the biggest differences, and one that I actually like on the DVD release, is this. In the beginning of the movie, you have these military guys in the cold, dark rain getting ready to travel and take all these trioxin barrels out of town. And in the DVD release, there's this voiceover that's talking about the lethal matters of 2,4,5-trioxin and how deadly it is and how the government realized how deadly it is. And then Julian Cope's Space Hopper plays. On the Blu-ray release, which is now akin to the original and proper release of the film, you just get a little bit of creepy music as things are setting up, and then we cut quick to the Julian Cope Space Hopper song. That is the biggest difference that I don't hear enough people talk about, is the voiceover that plays on the DVD. So after doing all this, I needed to figure out what was going on. And then one day, my buddy who goes by the name Steak Sauce online told me, "Hey Christian, I know you're interested in Return of the Living Dead Part 2, and you've heard about those potential lawsuit issues with the soundtrack for this movie. Do me a favor, swap the language to French." Guess what, guys? The J. Peter Robinson score plays on that version. If there was some sort of lawsuit issue, it certainly wouldn't be on this DVD release. And then there's a part of me that says this, and I just think this is the biggest reality of the whole situation. A movie like Return of the Living Dead Part 2, if there was some sort of issue with the legalities of the songs being put in the movie, and maybe some sort of payment issue, this movie is not important enough for a company to want to be able to pay out to put out on DVD. It's just not. So what I think happened was this. When this movie was coming out on DVD, there was a print of this movie somewhere maybe in the Warner Brothers lot that had the score that Wiederhorn put into the movie to send to the head of Lorimar to hear so that he could show him how it didn't work. And that print ended up on this DVD release. I don't think this is a lawsuit issue whatsoever. I definitely say that the soundtrack that J. Peter Robinson made does work much better for the film, but this makes this DVD release a massive anomaly. I think this makes this release really cool. It makes the film play out differently tonally. There's a little bit more of a thump in this movie that gives this movie a little bit more of a darker pulse. Still funny, but different nonetheless. I'm trying to put this mystery to bed. It's not like I think I'm smarter or better than other people when they say things about these movies, but I'm such a super fan, I can't let it go. There is no lawsuit. This was a screw-up, and they put the wrong print of the movie out on DVD. If you see this DVD in the wild and you don't have it, I say get it, because this is a weird release that somehow slipped through the cracks. Thank you guys for watching this video. I would love to hear your thoughts on the matter down below. This is your old pal CHH, and enjoy both versions of Return of the Living Dead Part 2. Huge giant thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you guys, this would not be possible. To get behind the scenes photos, videos, music, private live streams, and much more, you can subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Thank you to my patrons.